let's start with a really easy question. So, who are you? What do you do outside of writing? What are your hobbies?
So I'm Claire Rosalind. I have been writing for a very long time. I remember starting writing when I was like a kid. Um, so that's been one of my biggest hobbies. But I do have a bit of like an eclectic array of things that I like to do. So I also am a black belt in martial arts. That's something that I want to get back into. But I
Mhm.
used to do that a lot as a kid and in my early adult years.
Mhm.
Um, I I do a lot of random house renovations, which I
Mhm.
think drives my husband insane because there's no order to it. I'll just be like, I want to decorate this room, and then I obsessively do that.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's at this point, I think that's a hobby of mine. But like outside of all of that, like I work. I'm a rural nurse, so I work between two different small rural hospitals here in Australia, and I really love doing that. That's
Mhm.
definitely one of my biggest passions. So
That's wonderful. What made you go to nursing route?
okay, so I actually got into it by accident. Um, I was down the track. I'd like to get into midwifery, and I was up late. I had a little baby at the time, so I was
Mhm.
up late feeding, and I was thinking like I want to look into that. And so I thought I was applying for more information on how to get into that career. And
Mhm.
a few days later, I got an email saying that I'd been accepted into nursing.
Oh wow.
So I was sort of like, well, there's no harm in if I don't like it, if it doesn't work for me, if it's not the right time to study, I can drop out because it's not what I was aiming for.
Mhm.
But I ended up really enjoying it, and now I can't see myself ever doing anything different. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Well, it's funny how it
happy
works like
accident.
that. Yeah. So you said you started writing when you were young, when you were a kid. Like, what made you get into that? Like what made you so drawn to storytelling?
Um, I always loved storytelling. Like when I was little, before I knew how to read and write, I would play with my dolls. Like I would come up with really elaborate and days long worth of stories with my dolls. Like I'd go to bed, I'd wake up the next morning and be like, all right, now the next part of this story I was doing yesterday. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I used to, that was my way of playing, was just telling long thought out stories with my toys.
Hmm.
But then yeah, when I got into reading, I loved reading books, obviously. I loved writing when I started learning how to do that. It was always
Yeah.
really basic. But a few years ago, I actually found one of my old like school journals from like sixth grade, and
Uh-huh.
one of my characters in that was named Ryan. So I was like, oh,
Oh
it's
my
been a long
God.
time that I've been saving this character up for a story.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and he wasn't even a love interest in that storyline, but
Yeah.
developed into one. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
I've always just liked storytelling. I've always just been drawn to that. I never thought
Mm-hmm.
it would become anything, but yeah.
Yeah. It's like really awesome that like you kept kind of like lying around like ever since you were in the fifth grade, and then like look at him here, like oh my God, he got like you made him into like a well-rounded character, and he got to be like in his own series.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
It was really strange to come back across it and be like, oh, so that name's been in the back of my head for a long time. Because
Yeah.
I didn't plan my characters' names, I just started writing and that one came to me. But I was like,
Mhm.
oh look.
So like speaking of your writing, when you wrote the series, Do You Ship Us? How did that story come about? Like how did it like develop into what it is today?
Well, again, with sort of accidentally getting into it, I used to write a lot of fan fiction. I'll admit that now. Obviously, a lot of boy band stuff, but I'll never
Uh-huh.
admit to which band. Um, but I sort of felt the topics I wanted to write about were outgrowing the audience I had because I was wanting to get into more like mental illness and toxic relationships and that kind of stuff. And I found I'd get a lot of comments on chapters I was posting of people saying like, "Oh, I hope they work through this. I hope they get back together." And I'm like, "No, this is terrible, and I don't want that."
Yeah.
So I sort of decided to stop writing the fan fiction and start trying to write my own original characters. And I found
Hmm.
the website gayauthors.org
Hmm.
um, and started writing on that. But when I wrote the first chapter, I seriously had no plans. I just thought I'll write a chapter, I'll post it here. If I don't have an audience, if no one's interested, then maybe that's just the end of it. Like maybe fan
Mhm.
fiction was popular because lots of people liked those people, but
Yeah.
writing original characters, maybe I'm actually not good at it.
Hmm.
So I wrote a random chapter and I posted it online, and then I had a few comments and a couple of like reactions to it and thought, okay, I'll write the next chapter. But
Hmm.
I never really planned for it to go for anywhere near as long as it did, or for any of the storylines to come out of it the way they did. I had no forward planning.
Hmm.
Sort of accidentally turned into a 4-book series.
But it's still amazing how like you were able to take like just like an idea, just posting like one chapter here, one chapter there, and then it just turned into this like whole big series.
I ended up having I think it's a little over 200,000 views on the story online when I had to take it down for publishing. So it
Hmm.
definitely was a lot more than I expected.
Yeah. And it's good that like you also kind of like tested the water a bit to see if it would
Yeah,
have an audience, and then now it's like an actual physical book like out in the
yeah,
world, you know?
yeah. It's crazy. It really is. It's a bit insane, but
Like going back to like the mental health rep in your book, we see Ryan struggling with like anxiety and depression, and we see Chapter struggling as well. Like, do you think it's important for mental health to be represented in books?
yeah, I do. I really do. Um, I like that you brought up that you see Jasper struggling as well, because that does come up later. But I
Mhm.
think that the mental health themes are very important in writing to show the depression and anxiety through Ryan's character. But he's not the only one with mental health issues in the series. And without giving too much away, I think that like I I polarize a lot of the times where he is showing symptoms of his mental health disorder, alongside undiagnosed mental health issues.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's really interesting to see the different ways that some people react to the characters depending on what they know of them. So when Ryan's showing symptoms that are, a bit more difficult, people tend to sort of side with him and be empathetic and kinder in the way that they think that people should treat him. Whereas
Yeah.
when you see characters without a diagnosis, they're often like sort of blamed for their behaviors,
Hmm.
and like people are less likely to show that empathy towards them. And I
Yeah.
think that sort of I wanted to show that because I think it sort of shows the way that people are in the real world about stuff. Because if you are diagnosed with something, people are going to be like, oh yeah, cool, like let me know how I need to treat you for this, like let me know how you like to be spoken to, let me know like what is a comfort for you if you're having a moment like this.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're not
Yeah.
diagnosed with anything, people are like, you're being ridiculous, you're overreacting, like calm down. And or
Hmm.
they people. So I think, yeah, I was really passionate about showing having him be diagnosed from the start of the book, so you know all of his behaviors, all of his reasoning sort of can be coming down to that he has anxiety, so he gets like this, or he has depression, so he has these moods. And
Hmm.
then having other characters that also have their ups and downs, and there's sort of a less of a less empathy towards their actions and their behaviors.
And like I think you did such like a beautiful job with like showing like the up and downs of mental health, because it's not just all like you get a diagnosis and then it's all just like, oh, I know what's wrong with me, I'm gonna be fixed, you know? Like you still have like those bad days and like those bad moments, and I love how you were able to still to capture like the good and the bad of having mental health issues.
Yeah, that's something that I really wanted to show too, because I mean, like I grew up like in my teens, I was on Tumblr all the time, and there was sort of a romanticization of depression, and the overuse of anxiety as like this quirky little trait on like a
Hmm.
lot of Tumblr posts. And I think that that's sort of, it doesn't show that those things can be really debilitating, and that used to frustrate me a lot because I'd see, people want to look at it like, oh, this depression is this like beautiful hurt soul that, just needs to be loved back until health. And it's like, that's not
Yeah.
how it works. Like you can
Hmm.
give someone everything that they need in those circumstances. They're still got depression. And like
Yeah.
anxiety is this cute little thing that like, oh, you just, you comfort them, you put them in situations like this and challenge them a little bit, and they'll grow and they'll get better. And it's not like, you
Hmm.
have good moments and then you have your bad moments.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
to show that more.
Yeah. And then let's also talk about like the sexuality representation in the book. I personally don't see a lot of demisexual representation in really any kind of media, whether that be books or TV shows or etc. Um,
Yeah.
what made you want to add a demisexual representation into the book?
Well, again, with growing up in my teen years on Tumblr, that's where I learned the term demisexual. And so
Mhm,
for me personally, I didn't know what sexuality I was for most of my life. And then
mhm,
it was a Tumblr post. And I was like, oh, that's the thing.
mhm.
Other people feel that way. I'm not
Yeah.
broken. The community of us.
Mhm,
Because I didn't relate to like a heteronormative experience growing up, and then I didn't really relate to asexuality entirely because I wanted a romance. I wanted someone to fall in love with. I wanted all of that, and then in situations like I would date someone and be like, well, there's nothing here.
mhm,
Maybe.
mhm,
Um, and then so yeah, I learned that from a Tumblr post. And like you said, there's not a lot in a lot of media. I'm finding more of it now that I'm sort of I know where to look for it. It's actually is quite a popular thing in a lot of recent books.
mhm.
So that's really good. But yeah, I wanted to sort of show that sexuality and have it just be completely normalized from the start. No one's sort of going, oh, I don't get it. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you're just being picky. Everyone's just like, okay, cool.
And like I love that. And like even in real life, a lot of people do identify with it with demisexuality, and I'm one of
Yeah.
those people too. So seeing like that representation in the book can also help like people like me and people like you and like even like other people who are struggling with their like sexuality, like, hey, like okay, it's like it's normal, like there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with it. And I think, like you said, like you kind of like built like this world where like so you built like this world where like it's normalized in a way, like there's nothing to question it. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we need more of in our media.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
I'm really proud that I got to write a character that was just, and he's never questions it in his own story. I think that was a really important part of it too, that he comes into it knowing exactly who he is, how that works for him, and there's
mhm.
never an issue with his sexuality that way. There's a
Yeah.
little bit in book two, I think it is. I've been editing book three, and book two came out not long ago, so they're sort of blurred together in my brain. But I think in book two, there's a moment where he's sort of asked if he is gay or if he's bi or something, and he's like, "No, I'm demisexual. The gender isn't relevant." And
Mhm,
I wanted to keep that because I think you still get a little bit of that. Like I'm demisexual. I'm married to a cishet man. Like
mhm,
I'm like presumed straight. So I like
mhm.
to put in a like no, demisexuality is its own thing. There can be
Yeah.
preferences to genders, but it's its own thing. It's
Mhm.
not one side or the other or all sides. It's its own little box of
Yeah.
confused reasons why you like someone more than you like anybody else.
Yeah. I love that. So like speaking more like on the characters from the series, who was the hardest character for you to write?
I think the hardest character for me to write has changed throughout the books.
Mhm,
I think it's ended up being Jasper's character because he goes through a lot more change and a lot more development than I ever expected for him.
mhm,
By the end of the series, there's just so much that he has to deal with, and then because I didn't really plan ahead, I've had to go back and edit it, keeping his character authentic for what he knows of himself at that time,
mhm,
but sprinkle in little like clues of what's going to come out later for him.
mhm.
So that made him a much more complicated character than I set out to do.
And then who would you say would be like the easiest character that you wrote?
Again, I think it changed through the series, but
Mhm,
obviously when I set out and when I started writing it, I related a lot more to Ryan's character, being that he's the demisexual one, he has the anxiety, he has depression.
mhm.
So I related a lot to him. So I found him easy to write in the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, I was thinking about it just this morning, and I thought actually I think Blake's the easiest character to write
Mhm,
because he doesn't have to explain himself. He gets to just be
mhm.
completely biased and say it
Yeah.
how it is. No, like
Mhm,
it's not that he doesn't grow, but his growth isn't like a main plot point on the page. You don't have to, with Jasper and Ryan, if they have like a falling out or something, they've got to come back from that and they've got to move forward from that and grow. So you have
mhm.
to sort of be delicate about how you handle it all. But with Blake, he can just say shit how it is
Yeah,
and get
yeah.
it. Everyone's just like, yeah, that's Blake. So a lot less stress about how I present his character. Like, obviously, I want him to be likable,
Yeah.
and I want him to come the right way. But I'm not. I get to have a lot of fun with his character.
Hmm. And like just reading, like even just reading like just the first book, like I saw like a lot of that. Like I saw like, oh, like he's just doing his own thing. He's just being Blake.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he gets to be completely biased whichever way he feels like being that particular day. Like, he's
Yeah.
obviously very biased with Jasper, and so he gets to just say like the most like supportive things towards him and completely cut out anybody that's wronging him. But then he can
Hmm.
also turn around and call Jasper out on his behavior. And like there's never
Yeah.
any no one's calling him out on it. Everyone's just like, he's saying what we're all thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly. You said like with this series, you kind of just didn't really plan ahead. You just kind of wrote it as you go. Would you say that you're more of a pantser or a plotter or a mixture of both?
definitely a pantser. Most of the series, because I was posting it online, I had sort of this dumb rule for myself that I'd have to post like one chapter a week. And then for most of the series, I was not just sitting down and going, okay, I'll prepare the next chapter. I'll give myself a week to write it. I was like, oh crap, I haven't written a chapter yet. I better write something. And just sort
Mhm.
of bleh, whatever came out of my brain. And so it's it's amazing it turned into anything, honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how so much of it went. Was just me the night before I was supposed to, of my own rules, post the next chapter.
Yeah.
Quickly scribble a couple of thousand words out and post it and be like, there you go, there's a chapter. I'll finally be prepared next week. And that never happened. So I
Hmm. I love that.
think there would be like small periods of time where I would get, because I'd be like, oh, I know where this is going. But then the rest of the time it was like, better write something.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just write something down and see what happens.
Yeah. And then because I don't plan anything, I add random details into the story that then need to be explained later. And so it ended up being so much more than it was ever meant to be. Like even though
Hmm.
I didn't plan it from the beginning, there
Hmm.
was a point through writing book one where I was like, oh, I'll finish it with a concert and a kiss and a coming out song, and that'll be like the end of it. And
Yeah.
then because I didn't plan ahead and I didn't plot out the moments in some kind of order that would mean that that would actually finish and be enough. The
Hmm.
characters weren't saying I love you by the end of the book. There was too many other things I'd introduced by that point that didn't get resolved yet. And I was like, oh,
Hmm.
that's not finished there.
Yeah.
So book was where the only planning I did was to finish at that.
Hmm.
And three entire books later, I finally rounded off the plot points that I'd been sprinkling in with no further planning for any of them. Just being like, oh, Jasper has a twin sister. Ryan's ex. Like all
Yeah,
these
yeah,
extra
yeah.
little things.
Yeah.
Need to explain later. Takes me a very
Yeah.
long time.
But I think in a way, like it was so clever that you did that because then we can kind of like continue going on with the characters, like rather than just having it all jam packed into one book and being so like overwhelmed. You broke it up like pretty well, like where you can actually continue on.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad it went that long because looking back on it, like when I finished writing what is going to be book four, like Jasper's character up until book four doesn't actually go through any massive character development. I think if it
Hmm.
ended at one, like he was quite an annoying, arrogant character for a lot of the first part of the book.
Yeah.
I like people aren't. It does take a long time for his character to be fully rounded out,
Hmm.
um, and for a lot of like the growth that he has to go through, which I didn't plan, but
Hmm.
there was a point book three where I had this moment and I was like, oh no, Jasper's gonna have to go through something. It's like,
Yeah.
oh gosh. And so yeah, I think it's a good thing that it didn't end there because I don't think he would have been yeah, I don't think he was done. I don't think he was anywhere near done. So
Hmm. So while you're like you're writing, do you have like any kind of like writing ritual? Like do you listen to music while you write? Do you have like a certain cup of tea while you're writing? Anything?
I don't really know. Uh, my life, I love my writing. There's very little planning involved. It's all just this is what I'm doing now. Um,
Mhm,
when I'm when I'm editing, because now there is some kind of schedule to my writing. When I get
mhm,
a book back from the editor, I tend to like sort of close myself in my room for a few days. Like I have to focus all of my energy on editing this.
mhm,
I don't have any like rituals, but I am a tea drinker and I will just drink copious amounts of tea while I'm writing. I think sort of the only ritual thing that ever happens for me is that I'll make a playlist of songs that sort of match themes in the book, and I will listen to that playlist the entire time that I'm writing or editing that book. I'll have it playing in the car when I'm driving.
mhm.
I'll listen to it when I'm doing things around the house just to sort of let my thoughts grow along with the music that I'm listening to. But a lot of the times when I sit down to actually write, I have to turn everything off, otherwise I get distracted. So
Yeah, I definitely feel that.
yeah, any amount of noise is too much noise.
Yeah, even if it's like the very tiniest little noise, if like a
Mhm.
pin drop, then I'm distracted.
Yeah, we go see what that was.
Yeah.
Even like, people say put on some white noise that like helps you concentrate doesn't work for me because then I'll spend way too much time trying to pick the right white noise thing and then I'll lose all of my free time. So
Yep. So you're like a indie author, you use like a small print and press, I assume, right?
yeah, it's a
So,
small press.
but do you have like any advice for like any other like self-published authors, like if they want to go that route rather than traditionally publishing?
I think that going self-publishing or like a small press is a really good idea for people. I don't know. I see a lot on Twitter. It just sounds awful to go through the traditional publishing route. So
Yeah.
um I think you got to find the right sort of place that publishes similar books to yours, and then just sort of go for it and see what happens. I
Hmm.
don't have a lot of advice because I find for myself I don't follow advice. I just go with whatever vibe I'm feeling at the time. The main thing with like indie and small press is that it takes a lot. You've got to build like a following for it, and I didn't really realize that before I published. So I've like struggled to get my stuff out there
Hmm.
because I'm not good at social media stuff. I think I don't know how people do it, but for me it's not really um I'm either posting like too angsty shit or I'm just posting comments back to things that are completely irrelevant to my writing. So I don't have
Hmm.
a brand. Some people are really good at that. If you're good at social media, do
Hmm.
that. That's
Yeah.
probably going to work. If good luck. Um, I found that promoting in Facebook groups is helpful. There's a lot of Facebook groups that you can get into and promote in. So I think like Twitter is falling apart at the moment. I know that's been where a lot of people have had success in the past, but that's certainly not working for a lot of people now.
I mean, I think you did a good job with promoting it on Twitter. Like, I mean, that's how I found you. I found you through like one of
Yeah.
your promotion posts. I'm like, oh, that sounds
Oh,
like a good book. I'm gonna follow this author.
oh well, there you go. Sometimes it works,
Yeah,
but a
that,
lot of the time I don't know. I don't know what works. I'm just trying everything
yeah.
poorly, probably, but I'm putting myself out there. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's probably the only good advice I have is just put yourself out there because no one's gonna buy your books if they don't know you exist.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
The only way.
So, kind of like going back to like you're a nurse full time. So, how do you balance like that schedule of being like a nurse and then finding time to write?
Well, I find that I am always the most motivated to write when I'm at work or
Hmm.
driving to or from. So that's very fun.
Yeah.
Um, I don't I don't know. I feel like I actually thrive on being stressed and busy. So the more I've got going on in my life, the more chance there is that I'm going to sit down and get some writing done because I'm going to say to myself like I've only got tomorrow off. Like I need to write something and I'm going to get in that zone and like stress myself out until something comes out of my brain.
Hmm.
I find that yeah, I don't have any kind of structure because it's shift work, it's all over the place and I'm
Hmm.
you know rural nursing, I'm often called in because they're small facilities, small staff amounts. So I sort
Hmm.
of never rely on knowing that I have time. So I just sort
Hmm.
of grab got it.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's done. But
Mhm.
I live 45 minutes away from both the hospitals I work at. So if I'm going to work, I have a lot of time in the car to think on my way there and think on my way back about things that I want to develop better in the story, or like a line of dialogue I want to add here and there. Or, yeah, so I
Mhm.
spend a lot of time thinking about writing, which is
Yeah.
a huge process, I think. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
counts.
I agree. I mean, you can't just automatically, I mean, I'm not that kind of person, but I gotta think about it before I sit down and write and start typing away, or else nothing come to the page.
Yeah. See, I think about it after I've typed it.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah,
that's now what am I going to do to make that work?
yeah. Oh, how wonderful it would be if we just like every thought that we had just automatically went onto the paper without us having to type or actually find time to write.
That would be so good. That would be so good. Often you think like, oh, this scene would be really cool to write, and then you sit down and nothing comes out of your brain, or like
Yeah,
every word doesn't quite sum it up, or you've used the same word 4 times in a small period of time, and you're like, I need a word different to softly. Like
yeah,
I need a better way to describe flirting.
yeah, yeah. Not just like chapter flirted with Ryan.
One of my friends pointed out that there was a lot of flirting in a short period of time in book 1, and I was
Mhm,
like, I'm pretty sure I went through it and made sure. And she was like, no, there was just like one part of it where there was a lot of like the word flirting came up a lot. And I went like search the particular word. I'm like, yeah, there's like 4 times in this one section where it's like
yeah,
flirty or flirted or looks at him with a flirty like expression. I'm
yeah.
like, oops.
Good thing
Need
for
a few more
Google.
words in the word. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So other than like the do you ship by theory, like what else do you have in store? Like what other writing have you been working on?
I have I've been sort of working on a few different things, so trying to see what sort of takes me. Because I think when I used to write fan fiction, I used to write multiple stories at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and I somehow did that so easily. I don't know if that was just a time of life thing where I was more free to sit and write, or whether my
Mm-hmm.
brain was just less cluttered with all the adult stress I had. But
Mm-hmm.
I was able to write multiple stories and I'm sort of trying that approach now to see if I can just work on a few different projects instead of
Mm-hmm.
sitting down and focusing on one. Um, but at the moment, there is one that I'm sort of working on a bit that I don't know if it's going to become anything, but it might.
Yeah,
I don't
we'll
know where
see.
it's going. I was trying to explain something that I'd come up with to one of my other writing friends the other day, and it was about the two main characters that I was planning would get together in the end. I can't write characters without giving them so many problems that it's near impossible for them to work out a relationship. Because he was like, "So they're gonna end up together?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like,
Yeah,
"How?" I'm like,
it's just gonna work
"I
out.
have no idea." It's anyone's guess at this point.
Yeah, yeah, you gotta torture them a little bit first.
Yeah, I just got to put them through so much hell that it's almost impossible, and then they'll get their
Mm.
happy later after.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's cheaper than therapy.
Yeah. What are your favorite authors and what are your favorite books that you read recently?
I had to write that down too because I'm very forgetful. I've recently finished reading the second book in a series
Hmm.
by D.N. Bryan. The first book was How to Bite Your Neighbor and Win a Wager, and that was really cool. And I've just finished reading How to Sell Your Blood and Fall in Love, which is a
Mm.
demisexual vampire story. So
Oh,
that one
okay,
was
cool.
really this year. I've sort of been focusing on reading a lot of supernatural and sort of that fantasy type books. Last year I
Yeah,
read a lot of this year I'm doing a lot of like supernaturally ones.
yeah.
So a lot of the ones that I've read this year have been like vampires or magic or something.
Hmm.
There was M.N. Bennett writ a writ writ. I'm an author. I can't speak. Wrote a book. Um,
Hmm.
and that one was called Three Meant to Be. That one was really good. That was the magic one. That one was
Hmm.
really cool. Recommend that. And also good mental health representation in that one.
Oh,
Um,
good.
and he'd also written a book. What was that one called? Crescentville Haunting, which was a vampire one, but also had
Hmm.
other other types of
Mm,
supernatural beings in it. That one was really cool too. Less of a romance, but a very
mm,
cool book.
mm.
Um,
They all
so those are
sound
some
so
of the
good.
fun. They
I
they
said
are really good.
yeah,
Really
they sound
recommend.
good.
There was one I read last year that was a magic school. Tim Tamaro and the Subterranean Heartsick Blues, I think it was called. And it
Okay.
was really, it sold me because on the back of it, it said something about like enemies to friends with benefits. And I was like,
Mm.
that sounds fun. And
Yeah.
then it just ended up being such a like a wildly, this is happening because magic, don't question it kind of book. And I loved that. I think I was just in the mood for something I could switch my brain off and just be like, yeah, cool, that's where the plot's going. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes total sense. Magic
Yeah,
happened.
yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah.
that one was really fun.
Hmm.
And if you like books that like break your heart, there was They Both Die at the End by
Oh
Adam
my God.
Silvera. Which have you read that one or
No,
heard
I
anything about?
haven't. I haven't read that book, but like I'm kind of scared going into it because of the title. Like they both die at the end.
Yeah, see, I went into it pretty confident because I'm like, well, if they're both gonna die, and I know that from the start of the book, I'm not gonna get attached.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let
Oh
me
God.
tell you, that is not how it happened.
Oh boy.
Hurt me. That book hurt me in a lot of ways.
Oh.
I think I cried like the last 20 or so pages of that book.
Hmm.
And, like you expect it the whole way through, but it is such a stressful read,
Hmm.
especially if you're someone like me who like the idea of knowing that you're gonna die at some point is horrifying. But
Yeah.
then like yeah, that sort of dystopian style world
Hmm.
is just oh, it's so stressful because it's
Hmm.
set up on the idea that you get a phone call on the day you're gonna die, and you're told like today's the day,
Yeah.
go and make the most of it. And
Mm.
like you sort of think, oh well, in that case you can make the most of it. You can see the people you love, you can go do the things you always wanted to do, like
Yeah.
make the most of your day. But it's just horrifying some of the things they bring up in it.
Yeah.
And oh my God, the amount of times I would just be reading about a scenario and I'm like, oh, that would absolutely be the worst. Like I would take
Oh,
myself out at this point. Like,
oh my
I do
God.
it.
Oh.
But yeah. So if you want to be mortified and heartbroken, that's a good one. I've got the second one, which is The First to Die at the End. That's been on my to read pile for a long time because now that
Mhm.
I've read the first one and I know how much it hurt me, I'm
Yeah.
like, I've wanted to read it, but I
Yeah.
don't think I am.
Yeah, you just
And I
wanna,
really feel that kind of thing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
one you think about something.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
But good
It's
to
a
know.
lot. A lot.
I'm gonna read that book when I wanna hurt myself.
Yeah. It's a good book, and the writing style is easy to read, and the characters are like for what it is, like you get told at the start of the book that the character's going to die at the end of the book, but that's one single day for them. And
Yeah.
so the book follows just one day of their lives, but you
Hmm.
you feel know them so well by the end of it. It's incredible. I think it's a real talent to be able to take just one day and write like I think it's over 200 pages worth of a
Hmm.
story for them and
Wow.
craft them so well. Like that's really impressive writing, which is why I enjoyed it. But I
Yeah.
think that also hurting people because they've got a few books out that are just devastating.
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, a good
Yeah.
recommend them only if you want to cry.
Yeah. Well,
Well, thank
thank you
you
for,
so much.
yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you for agreeing to do the interview. I had a lot of fun.